So thank you everybody for coming. I was looking, I've been sort of watching the as you have all been coming in, and it's great to see so many familiar names, people I've worked with, and a lot of people I respect a lot, as well as a lot of new names. So thank you very much for coming to our talk. This is very exciting for both of us, I think, as we sort of move into this next phase, or finish off a phase, I guess, and move into the next phase of VisColl, which has been a project that we've been working on, as Nick said, for some number of years. So if you want to tweet along, I think that's fine. Alberto and my Twitter handles are here if you want to do that. There's also our email addresses if you would like to email us, and my blog, and Alberto's ORCID ID. So we've divided the talk into two parts. I'm going to do a retrospective on VisColl, sort of to give Alberto's part context, and then Alberto is going to talk about the most recent work that we are going to be launching very soon. And so without further ado, I want to take a step several years back to 2014, when we sort of launched a thing that we called at that time the SIMS Collation project. So here we go. So at that time, I just want to give a little more historical context of sort of where I was and where Alberto was in 2014. It was my second year at Penn. I had just arrived here. I just started in 2013, in April of 2013, so almost exactly 8 years ago from today. And I had been, before I came to Penn, I had been working primarily in digital spaces. So I had been working in digital humanities for many years. And as Nick mentioned, I had been before that at the University of Indiana, Indiana University Bloomington, where I was working in the digital library program. So it was very digitally focused. I had a master's degree in medieval studies, and I had studied paleography and codicology while I was doing that, but that was sort of the early 2000s, very end of the 90s. And so the digital material was sort of coming up, but there wasn't a lot. And so a lot of the training, I remember studying paleography off of photocopies of microfilm and this kind of thing. But by 2014, there was a lot of digital material that had come up. And I had been sort of doing a lot of reading about manuscripts. So you see here three books that I was sort of reading around this time. And I was having sort of an issue, I guess, with the way my brain works in terms of taking the arguments that scholars would make in books and actually applying them to the manuscripts themselves. So for example, in the illustrated Old English Hexateuch, Cotton Claudius Before the Frontier of Seeing and Reading in Anglo-Saxon England, which is here. This is a book I read several times by Ben Withers, and he makes arguments about how that manuscript was made. And without having the book in front of me, it was hard for me to sort of visualize it. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if there was some way to do that with computers, where you're not really trying to recreate the book. You don't want to make a facsimile of the book, but you're trying to use computer information to organize it in a way that can help you see the book maybe in different ways. At some point, I decided that I wanted to see this work as sort of part of a much longer history in the physical description of manuscripts. So I did a little bit of looking, and I found the 1802 catalog of manuscripts in the Cottonian Library, deposited in the British Museum. And this is the description in that book of that Old English Hexateuch, Cotton Claudius Before. And you can see the physical description at the top, where it says basically it's a codex made of parchment in a folio format. It has 156 folios, and there's one folio that is mangled. So this is the amount of physical description that we have in this 1802 catalog. But skipping forward 150 or so years to the, I have to move you again, you're in my way. So I'll move you over to the side again. This is NR Care's catalog of manuscripts containing Anglo-Saxon. Here again, we have the manuscript, the same manuscript described. You can see the entire description is much longer. It's in English and not in Latin. If you look over on the right-hand page in the very middle, there is your physical description, and I'll give you a little zoom in. Hello, can I zoom in? There, oh, sorry. So here we go. This is the full physical description of the manuscript. Again, we have 156 folios. We have a little more information about the fly leaves. We see that it's parchment there at the end. And then there's this thing in the middle here, this that starts on the third line. And that is the collation formula. And the collation formula is the thing that manuscript catalogers traditionally use to describe the physical construction of a manuscript. In addition to all of the narrative bits that go around it, there's this formula. And what the formula does is it tells you how the leaves fit together into quires, and then how the quires fit together into a book. So that is what we usually have to go for. And again, maybe it's just the way my brain works, but I have never been very happy with the collation formula, because the translating that, I know what it means. I know we have a quire of 8 when the first leaf is missing, and then the second quire has 8 leaves, and then the third quire has 4 leaves, and then there's an added leaf. I know how to read them, but taking that and actually applying it to a physical book is not something that I can do very easily. And so this was another thing that sort of led me in the direction of VisColl. Like, is there a better way to describe the same information, and maybe even more information? Maybe we can more information in there using computers. 2014, as I already said, there was a lot of digital projects coming up. Only 2 years before, the digital Walters had been launched at the Walters Art Museum, and I'll say more about that. So we have many, many more manuscripts coming online. This screenshot is from eCodices, which is the sort of national digital library of manuscripts in and from Switzerland. And it's still amazing, and even then, a lot of manuscripts online. What I'm looking at here is what I usually call a page turning interface. So you can see very clearly that the two images, it's not actually a picture of a book open. You have one photo of the verso and one photo of the recto, and so they're sort of put side by side, but you can sort of turn through it, and it's sort of like you're sitting in front of the manuscript. And you can also have things like this gallery view. But what both of these, and also I think there's one more, this is actually a screenshot that I took yesterday. I don't remember if eCodices had this kind of view back in 2014. This is actually from their Mirador viewer now, which uses IIIF, which may be a term that's familiar to. It's just a way to present manuscripts. And this is a scroll view, but I think of it as digital microfilm, because you've got sort of that microfilm view at the bottom. But what all three of these lack is the sort of physical, anything physical about the book. It's basically different ways of arranging pictures of pages. And so you probably know one of the things I'm really interested in is this sort of physicality. So again, how can we get the sort of physicality in there? I did note when I was taking the screenshots yesterday that eCodices has photos like this on at least some of their books now. I like to think if they had those in 2014, I would have taken a screenshot, but I don't know, maybe they had them in 2014. So this gives you a sense of the physical book, but it's not at the level of quire and leaf and let's see the bifolia and this kind of thing that I'm really interested in. So, but it's sort of there, we're sort of edging up to there. And of course, when I talk about the physical structure, this is I like this view because it gives you a good view of the spine of a manuscript, and you can see where you have these booklets that you can call gatherings or choirs that are basically sheets that have been laid and folded, and then they've been laid on top of each other and they've been sewn together. So you can see the sewing here. And this is what I'm really interested in and have been interested in getting across in some kind of virtual form. And here is a diagram of a choir. You've all seen these. This is just, you've got your sheets of parchment. In this case, you have, flesh facing hair, which is sort of interesting. Usually you have flesh and flesh and hair and hair. You have folio numbers, you have the recto and the verso, choir number, all of the important parts of a diagram. So this is sort of where I was. This is where my head was in 2014. So I went to Will Knoll, whose name is not on here, but I actually owe him a lot. Will Knoll is the former director of the Schoenberg Institute, the former director of the Kislak Center. He's now at Princeton. When I came to him originally and I said, I want to do this, he said something like, I have no idea why anyone would want to do that, but go ahead and do it. And I said, okay, I will. So I owe him that. I owe him having that, that sort of foresight. So I reached out to Doug Emery, who is our, at that point was a Sims digital content programmer. He's still at Penn doing cultural computing, and he's still with us. Dennis Mullen, the web developer, and Alberto was really the first person, aside from the people inside of Penn, that I reached out to, because as you heard from Nick's introduction, he was at that point, I think, working on or had just finished his PhD dissertation, and his work on bindings was just right along with what I wanted to do. And so he came on board and did all of the SVG early on, and he sort of stayed on and been really helpful. So the way that we started was actually with taking collation formulas, the things I didn't like, and making them into visualizations. So that's sort of how we started. And we used the collation formulas that were developed as part of the digital Walters. So here are some screenshots from the digital Walters, and there's the collation formula that's in their XML. So we said, okay, this is just a start, just to see what we can do. We'll take the collation formula and parse it and make a visualization from it. So you could say that this is the VisColl first data model, if you want to. This was our very, very first data model. And you can see it's very simple. At the top, you have choirs. So what we're saying is we have a bunch of choirs. We're not even calling it a manuscript at that point. It was just a bunch of choirs. Each choir has a number, so you know what number it is, and then a number of positions, which would equal the number of leaves in it. And then you can see a couple of them here have a less, with a number in it. Less means that leaf is gone. There's not actually a leaf. There's a position, but not a leaf. And we did it this way because the way that one of the quirks of the Walters collation formulas, at that time at least, is that they only noted missing leaves as being minus. So if a leaf was added and there wasn't a leaf attached to it, this would actually be noted as a less on this side, not as a plus on this side, which caused me a lot of consternation, even at the time, but it was useful for this exercise. So we parsed it, and then Alberto wrote scripts that created files, SVG files, which is just a file format of diagrams, and this was what came out. And so you can see here's choir 6, and that 5th leaf, which was noted as being less in the data model, is not there. So this was our very first, and we thought, okay, that's really good, except that it only works for that very specific formula. And immediately when we're like, okay, well, let's try doing it with more expressive formulas, it immediately just became too complicated to write code to parse those formulas. So, and here's just an example of a complex, one of CARE's complex formulas. So we said, okay, that's not going to work. So what we're going to do for our next, so that was 0.1, now we're going to 0.2. What we're going to do is we're going to make a data model that is a little more robust. And at this point, we were writing these by hand, and then we'll visualize them. So I'll show you some visualizations in a minute. But you can see now we've graduated a little bit from having choirs and then just one line for each choir, where we now have leaves. So every leaf in the manuscript is being described. It could be missing or it could be added. So we added that, sort of making it a little more robust. We can say if a leaf is single or not. We have the conjoins. The conjoins linked up here. It gets a little bit weird when you have an added leaf and you have to make a fake leaf. We weren't really happy with this, but we needed it. It was a thing we needed for the script to be able to generate the visualization correctly. And then, of course, I have to say at the top, we have the basic metadata about the manuscript, so you know what manuscript it is. So this was our next data model. And what we did once we figured it out, then we just made a bunch of use cases and sort of made up different visualizations to serve these use cases. So the kind of use cases that we thought of, well, you can always analyze a single manuscript. You can compare manuscripts, compare their, if you have two copies or a copy and an exemplar, you can compare them. Do various reconstructions, either of a palimpsest or doing some fragmentology where you pull them together. And so these are just examples, and we had them available publicly on this collation project page. So there was a drop down and you could see any of them. So this is one that we did of one of our manuscripts, LJS 266, The Generation of Adam. This manuscript is interesting because it is a genealogy, but instead of being in a scroll format, it's in a book format. And so I thought this was sort of interesting. But you can see this is the basic view of, this is like the VisColl output at this point. You have on the left a diagram, and whatever bifolia you're looking at is highlighted. You have folio numbers. And then over here, this is really what was the core thing that I wanted to do with VisColl, because what it does, as you can see, is it's showing you both sides of this bifolium. So you have one verso and 8 recto, and then it's like you take the sheet and you flip it over, and then you have 8 recto and 1 verso. So this is the kind of view you would only ever see if you were a conservator or you were very naughty and you took the book apart and sort of spread it out on the floor, which nobody does, like you don't do that. But you can do it with this, and this is really what I wanted to do. So there's the generation of Adam. You could also make it a little bit larger so you can see it a little better. The Harley Psalter and the Utrecht Psalter I did because they are related to each other, and I kind of wanted to see, they have actually very different collations. There's no thing, but it was fun to sort of put it together. Here's my old friend, Cotton Claudius B4. Of course, I had to put this in one. This is, I don't have the number on here. It's a fragment of Chaucer that is sort of kept, the bifolias are sort of kept separately. And so being able to combine them together was sort of fun. And then, of course, the Archimedes palimpsest, which is, this is a prayer book, but it's made up of sheets of parchment that used to be an Archimedes text. And in the book about the project, there is this diagram that shows how the original Archimedes book used to be formed. And so I took that and I made this this sort of diagram with the specially imaged bifolia. So this is what that manuscript would have looked like before it was ripped apart and made into a prayer book. So that's sort of interesting. Along the same lines, this is a another example, a manuscript that was taken apart. This is a Galen palimpsest, and so it was taken apart. In this case, these leaves aren't even in the same repositories. They're in completely different places. I think the numbered ones, the ones that don't have a library name, I think they may be privately owned. So you can combine these, and for Lisa Fagan Davis, I saw, who was in here earlier, has used VisColl to, this early version of VisColl, to sort of recombine some manuscripts that she's been working on. So that's really interesting. So at this point, we're still sort of 2014. Our next steps was we wanted to give this to everybody, which meant creating a form or something, because you don't want to write these XML files by hand. It's very hard. And then standardized formulas and other things, we didn't really think about that, but it was in my old PowerPoint, so I wanted to include that. So now we skip forward a few years to 2017. We've still been working on VisColl. Now I guess we're at sort of VisColl 1. So our group is pretty much the same, although we did have some help from Connell Toohey, who's a programmer in New Zealand, who did some important back-end work on the original visualization part of VisColl. So at this point, we had finally sort of conceived what VisColl was, that the heart of it is the data model, which I know I keep sort of talking about. And then you need tools, you need modeling tools for building models, and you need visualization tools to visualize the models. You need all of these things. And so that's what we built. And also at this time, another thing that we had going on at Penn was the Bibliotheca Philadelphiensis project. So this was a project funded by the Council on Library and Information Resources. It was headed by, or rather the PI was Lois Black at Lehigh University. I was a co-PI. Another co-PI at the was Janine Pollock at the Free Library of Philadelphia. And we basically worked for 3 years to digitize and make available 475 codices from institutions around Philadelphia. So that was exciting on its own. But what was important for this, and why I'm mentioning it as part of this talk, is that we were able to leverage bibliophily as another use case for VisColl. So for every manuscript that the project catalogers looked at, which was every manuscript we digitized, if we were able to determine the collation of the manuscript, we made a model for it. So we basically ended up with 400 some models of 475 codices as part of this project. So the next slides I'm just sort of going to roll through, but this both shows the how you collate a manuscript if you've never done that, and also how the form worked, how the system actually worked. So this is LC 1428. It's a manuscript from the Free Library of Philadelphia. So when I did this one, I would go into the form, and this is what it looks like. It's very simple. I'm going to make a new manuscript. I can put in my my shelf mark and the title information, and then you can see here I can say how many quires there are and the number of leaves per quire, and then I can change that later if I want. So I could say 20 quires of 8. If I have a quire that only has 6, I can go in and delete the leaves there. So I work my way through the quire. I get to 3 and 4, 3 verso 4 recto, and I see sewing. So I know that that's the middle of the quire, and indeed we get to the end. So I have a quire of 6 leaves here. So I go into what we call the collation modeler, this form, and I say I want 1 quire of 6 leaves, and there we go, 1 quire of 6 leaves. I can say things about the leaf. I can say if it's single, if it's added, replaced, or missing. I can give it a folio number. If the folio number doesn't follow, if the number is repeated or something like that, I can do that easily. So I go back in, and now I go 4 more leaves. There's sewing in the middle, and then I get to 14 and 15. There's a gap, and there's also a catchword, so I know I'm at the end of another quire. That's a quire of 8 leaves. So I'm going to add another quire of 8 leaves. And there we go. They're all original. They're all conjoined with some other leaf. And when I get to the end, this is quire 26. It's a very regular, not a very interesting manuscript actually, but I get to quire 26. The last leaf has been cut out, very typical to find at the end of a manuscript. So I note that it's missing. And there's the whole thing. Now, at this point in our old version, you had to export this XML file and then feed it into another tool to output the visualization. This is what that XML file looks like. And you've already seen this. You have leaves, inside quires, inside manuscripts, a very nested thing. And we also can output collation formulas if you want them, which we did because we wanted collation formulas in our records. So all of these went up on our open system, which is where we put, I don't say store, it's availability here. So we put all of our things up there, and there's the collation formula that was created through VisColl for this. So 2019, another couple of years. This is fun because this is when we finally got our interface for the Biblioteca Philadelphiensis project called Bibliophily. So we were actually able to take the models that we made as part of that cataloging creation. And if you see this little red arrow up here, there's a little thing that looks like a bunch of quires stuck together. And we worked with Byte Studios, which was the company that made this interface for us. And they created this view of the diagram. It's a little bit different from what we were doing before. You have the quires up at the top, and it's a little bit hard to see, but each bifolia down the middle, and you can see where there are missing leaves or if there's just a single one. And I've selected quire 9. And here we have each bifolia. So we have 59 and 64, 57 and 66. And then next to them, as with the previous view, you have the bifolia next to each other. And then if you click that, here's your bifolia view, 66 and 57, and then you flip it over and there it is. And as far as I know, this is still really unique in terms of incorporating some form of physical aspect of the manuscript into a digital catalog like this. I think I've seen it done one other time, but I'd love to hear more. So that's what was happening at Penn. At the same time, other work was happening that wasn't happening at Penn. So the Old Books New Science group, led by Alexander Gillespie at the University of Toronto, had received money from the Mellon Foundation to do a series of projects working on tools for book study and book history study. And one of the tools that they developed as part of this work was a tool called VisCodex, which is a tool to develop, to build and visualize manuscript collations. And they used the VisColl data model as an organizing factor for how they put it together. And we worked closely with them. The development team, Monica Ung, Janana Arthan, Rajakumar, and Rachel DeCresh did a really amazing job of building a really usable tool and making it available to us. So it was VisCodex that the VisCodex code that we have used in the development of the VCEditor software that Alberto is going to be talking about in his part. And I really can't say enough about what an amazing job they did taking this really complicated data model and turning it into something usable, and their generosity in allowing us to take the code and continue building on it is really great. So at that note, I am going to turn it over to Alberto, and he's going to talk about what we have going on right now.
Okay, so thank you, Dot, for this very nice retrospective. So, I mean, so many years and so many things we did. So exciting. And so finally, we are at the VisColl 2.0 and VCEditor. As can I? Yeah. Okay. So this new model that we are going to show you in a little bit is in a way a model that really takes the work that we did in the previous years and takes it to a completely different level, because we are able to describe things that are a lot more complex than we could have done with the previous data model. And in order to work with this data model, we also needed a good interface so that people didn't have to actually look and work with the XML. I do like to do my own, I actually write my own XML, but it's so much easier to do it with an interface. So in order for us to be as we are today, there's a lot of people that we need to thank, and it really gave us the input and the means to carry on and do our job and bring you this new interface. So thank you to everybody that collaborated with us. So as I said, manuscripts can have very complex lives. And in my own work, I knew that there were so many manuscripts and books that actually had such complex structures that it was almost impossible to describe these with collation formulas. On the other hand, as I was introduced earlier, I am a book conservator by training, and I know there is a lot of information that people looking at the structural books are interested in recording that is not normally recorded in collation formulas, such as, for example, the placement of the sewing, or a means in which different leaves are connected to each other. So what we did, we had to go back to the drawing board and redo our data model completely. And so we completely rewrote the schema, and we rewrote it in such a way that it was possible to really take in and digest any kind of complex structure. The first thing that we had to do, we had to give way to the idea that our fulcrum, our main building block was the gathering. And we are not saying that the gathering is not the ultimate working unit of the codex, but in order for us to be able to do and describe any kind of very complex structures, we had to think about our structure and the model again and say, okay, we are not starting from the choir as our main building block, but we start with the single leaf. A single leaf that can be also stub, and then is conjoined to another single leaf. And through all this conjoining and describing all this way in which different leaves are connected to each other, we can describe any kind of structure that comes to our way. So that's why the geekiest of you might have recollected that the title of this talk cites Spock in its infinite diversion, is because really books and manuscript can have, although the structure seems so simple, it's just you have seen leaves that are folded together and put into quires, the amount of variety you find is actually unbelievable. So the new model allows us also to have subquires. And we do this through a dot notation inside the XML. But you don't need to understand that. You just need to know that we are now able to do quires within quires, which is actually is not something you find every day, but I do find it quite a lot. And then, as I said, I wanted to be able to describe the ways in which the different leaves were connected to each other, and also where the sewing stations were in regard to the gathering. And these are all different attachment methods that we are able to describe with a new model. And for each of these, there is an automated visualization that takes into account information from the XML and is able to export that into diagrams. We kept the mode for each leaf. So we have the missing, added, replaced, and the original leaf. And also another thing that we added was the concept of uncertainty. By default, you are certain of something. You can say that using the certainty level 1, but if you're uncertain, you can have level 2 or level 3 if you're really uncertain about things. And I wanted to add this, and uncertainty can be added to any detail within the model. This is because even sometimes when as a conservator, I had to disbound books and put them apart. Sometimes things were so complex that I wasn't sure where actually a leaf belonged to one choir or the other. And I thought it was important to be able to say that something, you say, I'm pretty certain it's here, but it can't be 100%. So explain that and put that in the model. I think it was important. It's something you can't do in a collation formula per se. You can add a note if you want, but it doesn't come with the collation formulas. And this is one ideal leaf with all the information that you can have. So as I said, you say whether it's sub or not. You can have the number, the mode. You say whether it's conjoined to another leaf or whether it's a single one, and the way in which it's attached. And these are the kind of automated diagrams you can do now with a model. And this is an actual manuscript that I had worked with when I was at the Vatican. And I had this in mind when I was trying to, we were working towards a new data model. It's like, okay, we need to be able to describe this. So we did the data model, and then we tried this as our first trial, and the model didn't break. So it's like, okay, good, we are on the right path. So it was actually quite exciting. And then I wrote a script that took the model and really generated these kind of diagrams from the model that we put together. And this is another example of a very complex manuscript that I've been working with in the last couple of years. With this one is at the Marciana National Library in Venice. And the particularity of this manuscript is that it's been restored at least a couple of times in the last century. And there are strange sewing stations which make no sense whatsoever physically. I don't know why they sewn the book in those positions. So all the horizontal lines that you see here are the sewing station that go through the fold. So you understand the main one. You can understand why some subwires can might have been sewn together and put together in that way. But these are the two strange sewing stations out there. I don't know what they're doing. But again, I was happy that the model didn't break. The model was also able to record this information that we had no idea we had to record. So again, the model is it's good enough. And on top of this, we started thinking about other information that we might want to be able to record as we describe the physical collation of our books and manuscripts. So we added all these other sections about taxonomies where you can describe other things that you want to say about the book, whether you want to add information about the text that you have in the book and where it begins or ends in your collation structure, or whether you want to describe, for example, for parchment, you might want to describe the hair and flesh side of the parchment, or you want to describe the species of the animal, or any other kind of information that you want to add, based that you can tag these to the side level. So whether it's a recto or verso, or left or right side of the page. And working in collaboration with the biocode people and this to craft a project, I worked towards a visualization that takes the information I explained about earlier about the parchment information, so hair and flesh side and the animal species. And now with the code that it's online on a GitHub, out of the box, if you describe parchment according to the way in which has to be done for the code to be able to pick an information, you can get out of the box this visualization. So you have a visualization of the hair and flesh side, where the hair side has those bumpy lines, and the flesh side is smooth, and then the color coding for the animal species is the same that has been used from the beginning by the biocodicology studies. But VisColl is many things. So the core of it is a data model, as Dot says earlier, and you have many other different visualization applications that take this data model and help you to visualize it or to use it. So we have, of course, our own visualization that from the XML description of the collation takes information and does the diagrams on one side, and also rejoins the leaves that used to be physically connected to make up the conjoins. And this is the example that Dodd had earlier, where leaves that are not, that are an ocean apart now, they used to be physical together, and we reconstructed these through VisColl. And then we have VCEditor. So we wanted to be able to allow people to work with the model without having to write the XML and get lost inside this very complex model. And as was said, as Dot said earlier, the University of Toronto people had done such a great job with their VisCodex that it seems like the only idea was to actually use this model and take the tool that they constructed and bring it over to a next level with all the information that we added to our data model that wasn't available when VisCodex was developed. And so I'm gonna give you like a very short video that shows you how this VCEditor works, and I'm gonna talk over it as the video goes. So you're gonna request an account, and we will give you a link to do that, and then you can create a new project. You give a very set of very simple metadata to start with, and you can pre-populate with quires. For this example, I took one from Open. So it's a regular one of 8 leaves, or 8 quires of 12 leaves each. You give information there, and ta-da, it's calculated, and you can open the project, and it's done. You have all your quires there with all information that you wanted. This exam, I said, was a very regular one, but it had some missing leaves, so you can modify that by adding information about the missing leaves at the end. Then I worked towards adding the information about the sewing structure. So you can add the sewing structure, so you can say where the sewing happened. And again, you can do it also at odd places where you wouldn't expect the sewing to be. And you can do it for all the different gatherings. Another thing that we wanted to be able to do was, of course, to be able to add sub-gatherings, so sub-quires. So you can do that by adding a group, and you can add the group inside. You say where inside your main gathering you have your group of leaves. This one is going to be 4 pages conjoined, and you click on it. So there you are, conjoined. There you are, submit, and it's there. It appears inside your quire where you want it. And it's important to be able to say that it's a sub-quire by default, so you can. It's something you add to it, and then it's going to explain it. And you can also add single leaves and say whether it was attached by some means to the main quire, and this has been tipped, so some adhesive to the very end of it. Once you've done all your model, you can look about to export the data. So these will export the XML, so you don't have to write the XML. It will come out as you worked just by looking at your data on the screen. You can also export the SVGs. So these are the same SVGs that we had for our own code. And I'm going to explain how this all happens in the next slide. You can also export formulas. Now, for the moment being, the formula code doesn't really work for very complex structures because it was still based on the simple model that we had earlier, but it's something that I want to work towards to have more structure, more solid collation formulas extraction. And then you can also do the HTML visualization that are typical of our VisColl. Oops. Let me just okay, so as I said, we worked on top of the tool of the VisCodex tool done by University of Toronto, and we added the capabilities to be able to work with the XML data and the XSLT style sheet. So all the different visualization that we have been developing over the years are written with the XSLT scripting language. And so we created this system whereby working with the application as an interface, we can extract the data and have it worked in an export service called Hydrovora, which was developed by Gregor Middle. And through this, we can add each different style sheet for different kind of visualizations. We can add parameters. So, you can say whether you want to be able to, for example, add the information about the parchment visualization or not, or other kind of parameters you want to add. And then the export service will digest the XML through the XSLT and spit out the results in a zipped folder that can be then downloaded through the export application on VCEditor. And another kind of visualization that is using VisColl out of the box is EVT, which was developed by University of Torino. So once we make public our data model, you can use our VCEditor to work with it, and you can also develop your own visualization and tools. And this is the beauty of this whole project, because we are not really holding the whole thing. We try to make a model that works for most people, and we are happy to cater for different kind of visualizations. But you can also take the data and build your own visualization based on the VisColl data model. And of course, we also had the different visualization that was developed for bibliophile. So as we work, more information will be added to on the VisColl website, and so look for it. And as we said, we are really happy where we are, but there are more things we want to work towards. So once we are able to give you the VCEditor, we'll keep on working towards different development and future development. So one thing that both Dot and I really want to work towards is to be able to add a different kind of visualization with a kind of a synoptic view of the manuscript. And this can be done based on the same data model, just using a different kind of scripting that takes information and export it into a different diagrams. And then someone in a comment earlier talked about the printing imposition. I have a short visiting professorship at the University of Tours in France, which was supposed to happen in February, and then COVID was still a problem. Now, fingers crossed, I should be fully vaccinated by mid-May, and if everything goes well, I should be able to go mid-May to mid-June in France to work towards a visualization that takes information from VisColl and export that in a visualization that is try to reconstruct the format and imposition of printed books. And then in collaboration still with Jerzy Wojnek, of the Bioecology project, I want to be able to add information about the study of parchment so that we can add information, also add visualization that reconstruct the full skin, if it's possible, out of the information that we get from the single leaf that we have in the manuscripts. And then, as I said, we need to do more work towards exportation of collation formulas. And this is another thing that I really want to work towards. And this is where we are right now, but we're really interested to know your own ideas, where you had other visualization that you think you'd like to see, or other information that you think you'd like to be able to add to the model. And thank you again for coming to this seminar, and to everybody that has been helping Dot and I to work with this project. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dot and Alberto. That was really a great explanation of what is a really exciting project, and we're happy to have it out there and getting ready for people to use if it's not ready yet. We are open for questions. If anyone would like to submit, you can either put your question in the chat or let us know that you have a question and we can call on you. There are lots of congratulatory remarks coming in. I hope I'm not missing a question.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Sure.
If nobody else is. I have a very simple question that would mean very complex developments, I think. Have there been any thoughts about integrating the purely codicological information and textual information? You see what I'm getting at. The textual structure of a manuscript, which might be
yes, so
reflected or not reflected in the material structure.
Yes, you can, using the taxonomies and the mapping on the structure of the book, you can say whether a text was starting or finishing, and other information about the text information. And Dot has been working with this a lot, so maybe you can explain a bit better, Dot.
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is one case where the data model is ahead of the tools. So in the data model, it's a pretty simple matter to have, you can either have what we call taxonomies. So for example, if you're working with books of hours and you have all of the different texts that you tend to find in Book of Hours, you can have a taxonomy with all of the text listed, and then you can share that taxonomy among potentially several collations that you're doing, and you can go through and say, here's where the Hours of the Virgin are, and here's where the calendar is, and here's where the the Hours of the Dead are, and you can and then you can visualize. If you have a tool that will let you visualize it, then you can visualize that information. So yes, it's there in the data model, but we're still working. We'll sort of trying to figure out the tools to make that happen in an easy way. And I think the last slide that Alberto showed, which was the what was it called, the synoptic?
Yeah,
I'm getting confused. Yeah,
synoptic view. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of visualization where you can you could have those color coded, and you could really easily see sort of where they lie in the manuscript. But we're not quite there yet, although it's there in the data model.
Wonderful, thank you.
So there's also a question about the indicating the presence of diagrams and glosses. Again, it's the same process. So through the taxonomies, you can really add any kind of information that you want to based on the structure of the book. So you can say, you define a gloss as one of your terms, and then you map this term. This gloss appear in this leaf and this leaf and this leaf, and so you can add information through that. The visualization still, as Dot said, don't cover this, but you can definitely, the model allows you to actually tag and map this information.
Yeah, and the visualization is something that we're working towards. In addition to the taxonomy, you can also, and again, you can't do this in VCEditor, but we're working on it. You can also do sort of notes. So a taxonomy is something that you would find repeated. either through one manuscript or through several manuscripts, where a note might be something that this is an unusual thing that's only found in one place. And you can do both, and we acknowledge that they're like different things in the data model, and you do them differently, but the tool is not quite there.
Yeah.
And what illumination? There's another question about illumination on the page. That would be sort of the same kind of thing.
Yes.
Jermaine Workington has a question about adapting the model to manuscripts with one part in library A and library B. And Jermaine, if you want to elaborate, feel free to jump in.
I can think of different ways in which you can do this. So the data model allows you to have more than one manuscript in the same model. So that would be one way of doing it. Or if you wanted the structure to look as one whole unit, then again, you could use the taxonomies, where you can say all these leaves are from library A and all these leaves are from library B. So there are different ways, but the model allows you to, the freedom to choose the way you want to do it, and either way would work.
And then there are two questions. Sean Winslow and Manu Radhakrishnan have, I think that it's the same sort of question. Can anyone use this? Like, is it available for use, or who is the primary user if it's not available for individual use? Or is it just
right? So we are the status of VCEditor right now is we have just finished with a testing phase where we invited people to create accounts and to test, and we got a lot of really great feedback. And unfortunately, our main programmer had a family emergency, and so the person that we're counting on to finish up the development is unavailable. And so we are hoping that it will be a month or a couple of months. I don't know, Doug Emery, if you want to say more, but that's sort of where we're at the point where we're waiting, but as soon as it's ready, it will be available to anybody. We're just waiting for the last part of the development to be able to happen.
Can I just ask a question to follow up? So if I'm in the library with a manuscript and I'm describing it, that is, I'm not actually producing a library catalog. I'm writing an article on that manuscript, and so I'm a little bit perplexed as to how, when I'm actually sitting with a codex and I'm primarily interested in the text, how is this? Is this something that I should simply know about as something that's out there? It's not self-evident to me how I would have, how I would make use of this in an article that I'm writing about a manuscript.
Right. So if you're looking at, if you want to describe the physical manuscript in a sort of by collation, looking at the leaves and the quires and where the text appears, maybe it's interesting that if it's a collection of texts that each text is a quire, maybe that's something, and that's something that this could help with. If you're doing an edition of a text and you're not really interested in the physical manuscript, then this is probably not something that you'll use. But it might be interesting for you to know about, because maybe the next manuscript you look at, there will be something that's physically interesting and you'll want to try it out. So it's Alberto, do you want to add more to that? I think.
Yes, I mean, the tool that I showed earlier by the University of Torino, EVT is done for primarily for text editing. So it's for people working towards the edition of the text, but they wanted to add this tool to also show the physical facsimile of the original manuscript, because some people might be interested in also seeing how the structure was. So although they're working more towards getting the text and transcribing and doing an edition of the text, having also this other information might be useful for other people working with the same text. So it depends on how you want to use your data. If for you, knowing that how the original manuscript was, it's not useful or interesting, then probably this is not a tool that you want to use. But you might want to give people the minimal information, and then they might want to do more work on that based on that.
Thanks.
All right, the next question is from James Woolley. Would you like to ask your question, James?
Yes, thank you. Suppose you have a book that has been assembled more than once, the leaves have been assembled more than once in different arrangements. So there are different foliation systems or pagination systems within the book. Can you imagine using your application to help visualize the relationship or lack of relationship of the different arrangements?
So we actually have a graduate student working in our group who is doing that right now. I don't know if he's on the call and wants to say more, but we have a manuscript at Penn that it was just recently rebound, which was great because it means it was taken apart, so they were really able to see how it was. And what he's doing, I believe, is he's making several different models, one model for each of the known rearrangements of the leaves. And the last time I talked to him, I suggested that what he do is he code each leaf as its own physical thing, so then he'll be able to track as they move through the menu, and if leaves are no longer there, they can be taken out. So that's what he's doing. So it's not happening inside one model. There's only one model per physical object. Well, and then there's separate models for each. When I say physical object, I mean each sort of picture in time of that same physical object. And then he's going to make a separate website where he sort of uses those models to track the rearrangement of the pages. So at the moment, that's how it's done. Although I could see a new tool being developed that is specifically for tracking manuscripts that would make that easier. But given what we have now, that's how he's doing that.
Thank you very much. This is most exciting.
Thank you.
And the next question from Chantal Coble, if you'd like to ask, or I could ask it for you.
Thank you for great presentations, very exciting. Yeah, I'm just wondering, will there a possibility or suggestion of having to be able to visualize the addition of vellum slips? And I work with Irish legal manuscripts, and they're quite complex, and they often follow no rule in order, and are often use folded vellum tabs and slips. And I was wondering if there's a way to visualize that in a collation.
So is these are these slips like guards? So guards that are added to the leaves?
No, they're literally little tabs that they're writing glossarial material on and sticking
like on the outside of the.
Okay.
Yeah, like a slip, a post-it note almost.
So you can find your place.
Not a reading guide, but it's actually sewn into the manuscript.
Okay.
Okay. So for the presents, you can definitely do that through the usual taxonomy mapping. Straight out of the box, we will not be able to visualize this, but I think it's something that we can work. If it's something that is really important for you, we can definitely try to make something that it doesn't seem like it's too complex to add this to the code. So happy to talk further, and then we can try and make some new visualizations for you.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll send you an email.
Yes, please do.
There are many questions. We'll take as many as Dot and Alberto want to handle. It's 2:15, but we can keep. I'm fine to keep going. I think these are some good questions. So the next question is Lino Mioni. About, I don't know if is Lino here.
I mean, we can read it.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's fine. You can read it. I mean, it just.
Yeah. It's about, is there a way to include watermark information to support quire structures? So the simple answer is that you can set up a taxonomy of your watermarks, and that might be interesting because it might be, you might have different watermarks and also the different portions of it that you can see on the various pages. So do I see a top quarter or that? So that seems to me like a taxonomy thing on one hand. The visualization, though, if you actually want to visualize it some way that's visual instead of just saying here's where they appear, it seems like that would be a little more work. I'm looking at Alberto.
As taxonomy is your answer for most of these things. For visualizations, again, if it's something that you think is very important for you and you have to do more than once, we are definitely happy to talk, and then we'll try to work with you towards new visualizations, because if it's helpful for you, it will be helpful for other people as well. So we can discuss.
Thanks.
And Barbara Williams Ellertson has a question about pedagogy.
Yeah. So I have used, I don't know, Alberto, if you've used this in teaching before. I've used the previous version of VisColl with the form that I showed for a few years in a few different summer courses. So I don't teach regular courses. I tend to teach summer courses, and I think the students seem to really like it. It's a way to sort of make visual something that's sort of hard to understand sometimes, and creating the visualization at the end is always pretty exciting for them. It's like, oh, they've made something, and it gives them a new way to sort of look at the book. In the summer courses, each student has a manuscript that is sort of theirs for the week or for however long the course is. And so it seems to be a valuable way for them to sort of understand it. I can't wait to get some students using the VCEditor, the new one, because it's even, because you get the view right away. You don't have to wait till the end. I'm really excited to see how that works.
Also, on the other hand, it makes it easier to discuss even just one single manuscript with a group of people, because you can visualize how the things are physically together, and it's easier for people to see this on the screen, the diagrams and see the pictures, and then they come and see the real manuscript. But we already an idea how it works.
Mm-hmm.
With a group of people, it's difficult to get into the book without ruining it. So I've used it that way as well.
Yeah, so both ways. That's great. Yeah.
And the next question, I guess I could probably easier read them out. Is there an ability to include information on the exterior, type, material, covers, or just the leaves and quires? I guess on the binding.
So binding information, no apart from the sewing.
Yeah, I don't even think you couldn't even do that in the taxonomy, because the taxonomy just maps to the leaves. I mean, I guess you could map it. You could do a taxonomy and map it to the manuscript tag and say stuff, but that would be like that's kind of abusing. Yeah, I think it's really
Yeah, there are other tools to describe the bindings, so we didn't go into that.
Yeah, I wonder, could you combine VisColl with something that's designed to?
That's a new project that I'm working with Toronto.
Okay.
So yes, we're working towards a description of binding structures. And if Rachel or someone else from Toronto is here and they want to speak up as well, please do. So we are able to describe the binding structures and have the system visualize it for you in 3D. But we want to be able to link this visualization of the binding also with VisColl. So they're VisCodex, but VisColl as a model as well. So yeah, eventually will be coming.
And then another question from Shreve Simpson about non-Western manuscripts. And Shreve's referring to the mapping, sorry, I'm getting my acronyms confused, the Muslim world.
Manuscripts of the Muslim world.
Muslim world project.
Yeah.
So right to left writing.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. So the model, yes, the model allows you to describe right to left manuscript. In fact, is one of the elements they will ask you compulsorily at the beginning of the new model. You need to say whether it's left to right or right to left. And out of the box, our visualizations, so not for a moment being inside VCEditor per se, but you can still describe that and export it. And then the diagrams will be drawn the right way around, and the information is there. But I know for certain that Toronto is now working towards adapting their VisCodex to be able to describe out of the box right to left, and so we should be able to also piggyback on their experience there and adapt VCEditor to do that as well, also visually on the interface.
Right, and then the next question, Michael Winship. I'll ask it, but Michael, you might need to jump in. I'm not sure what you mean. Why did you decide to place the inner side of the, I think, bifolium BR to the left of the outer RV?
Yeah, I think this is referring to the bifolium view. And I think maybe it was, honestly, it's been so long ago. I don't remember what the reasoning was. Do you remember, Alberto?
I believe it was first the leaf as it will come out.
That's probably it.
Yeah, and then you reverse it.
Yeah.
I think it was like that, but it's just an arbitrary decision. What's important there is that you see the conjoin as they are, so the right leaves at the right side joined together.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Katarzyna Capitan. Is there a way of combining collations of multiple manuscripts into a single collation of a reconstructed book, or do you have to do it separately for each present day manuscript?
I think, Alberto, that was sort of addressed in the earlier question.
Yeah, so you can, as I said earlier, you can do it in 2 ways, or 3 ways eventually. You can decide to have each manuscript described with its own collation model, or you can have more than one manuscript inside the same collation model, or you can have combined the whole thing if you think original was one unit, and then map the information, saying these pages were from manuscript A or B or whatever.
Okay. And then Bill Endres, do you have any plans to include damage to leaves, such as wear? Could be a connection to collation in ways such as sewing replacement within quires. And I think Mark Smith's question might be similar. So I'm wondering if we could consolidate some of these questions.
So the wear and tear, you can do that with again the taxonomy.
Taxonomy or with notes, which you can't do in VCEditor, but they're in the data model.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So the main difference between the notes and the taxonomy is that if you have information that you want to map more than once, you should use a taxonomy. If it's just a one-off, you might as well just use a note, which is more straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah, and the same with Mark, the same with catchwords and signatures. That would also be taxonomy.
Yeah, definitely a similar question. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, there's so many, so many questions, and we're running a bit short of time. How about one or two more questions?
Okay, and we're I think, speaking for myself, I'm happy to take emails too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, and we can also save the chat. And I think a lot of these questions will actually be good for future development work. So let's see. Has there been any interest? I'll just introduce another topic from conservation departments to adapt this as a way of recording conservation interventions going forward. And if so, are there ways you would adapt this call for that task, or would you keep it basically the same?
I would keep it the same, and for sure I know that the Vatican Library is really interested into integrating VisColl into their conservation routine and description. So they've been invited to beta test VCEditor, and so they're at the very beginning, but they're really interested into that. And I don't know about other conservation departments for sure, but every time I presented, conservators were really excited because for once they don't need to look into the XML, and the diagrams that come out of the visualization, it's the exact information that they normally record, and it's easy to read and to, sometimes even just add notes by hand if they're printing it out. But you can also use the whole taxonomy and add information as you go through.
Yeah, I've talked to our director of conservation at Penn, and I know she has encouraged me to present it to conservation groups. So I think that there's interest, and we're interested too.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alberto and Dot. I wish we could get to all the questions, but maybe, like Dot said, via email or in some other mechanism. You should feel free to reach out to, I'm going to say this to on Dot and Alberto's behalf, to reach out to them anytime. I think they both be happy to answer questions. One final question is, how will we know when something usable will be released? And I can say that we'll do a pretty massive launch and have it out on social media and emails and through our sort of normal channels for getting information to people. So please stay tuned.
And check the website.
And check the website too.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.